Apologies in advance for all upcoming French pronunciations you're about to hear. She is one of the first true female villains in literature, and certainly the first to become an icon. She is a mature, powerful, competent woman, one at the top of her game, but who is getting a little tired of that game. These are the words of author Laura L. Sullivan, describing her view of Milady de Winter, the infamous villainess of Alexander Dumas' 1844 novel, The Three Musketeers. So enamored with the character was Sullivan that in 2019, she wrote her own novel focused entirely on de Winter. With the book, appropriately titled Milady, Sullivan sought to provide a more fleshed-out backstory and motivation for the character. For while Sullivan enjoyed Dumas' book, and Milady in particular, she couldn't help but notice how reductive the text could be in portraying any rationale for her behavior other than simply being evil, as well as how unfair the sexual politics of the novel are, in which the Musketeers are portrayed as brave, heroic figures, despite being, in Sullivan's words, cruel and criminal, men who drink, steal, heartlessly beat, swindle, or seduce people of lower social classes. As Sullivan points out, D'Artagnan, the book's young protagonist and chief heroic figure, even technically rapes Milady when he sleeps with her in the dark while posing as another man. An extremely problematic moment not surprisingly left out of many adaptations, and one which further illustrates Sullivan's point that Milady is not given fair treatment when cast solely as an unknowable, heartless monster, despite living in a time in society that was, to put it lightly, not always kind to women. With her novel, Sullivan hoped to redeem and explain Milady, finally making her the star of the story. It's not surprising someone finally wrote a novel like Milady, for Sullivan's absolutely correct when she muses on the iconic status of the character. Dumas' novel has remained one of the undisputed giants of literature since its publication nearly 200 years ago, and Milady has consistently been a large part of that. She's widely recognized as one of literature's great villains, and has been the focus of much scholarly review and analysis regarding her characterization and origins. Originally a minor character in a 1700 semi-fictionalized biographical novel of the real-life musketeer D'Artagnan, Milady underwent significant changes when Dumas wrote his heavily fictionalized version of the story over 100 years later. Dumas cast her as his version's primary antagonist, framing the entire second half of his novel around the musketeer's pursuit of Milady, and introducing a past romantic history between her and musketeer leader Athos. Many scholars have discussed the potential real-life historical basis for Milady. Many agree she's likely based on Lucy Hay, Countess of Carlisle, who allegedly stole a set of diamond studs France's Queen Anne had given to George Villiers, the first Duke of Buckingham, as revenge for the Duke breaking off a relationship with the Countess after falling for the Queen. The story has clear similarities to Milady's role in Dumas' novel, but in 1952, British author and monarchist Lord Sudley hypothesized Milady might in fact be at least partly based on the Chevalier d'Eon, who worked as a spy for Louis XV in the second half of the 1700s, and who lived half of their life as a man and half as a woman. It is Sudley's theory, therefore, that the fleur-de-lis brand, which marks Milady's criminal past in Dumas' novel, might actually be meant to represent, in his words, physical malformation, which was regarded even in the 16th and 17th centuries as a terrifying token of divine displeasure, punishable by death, and that this might make Milady one of literature's first transgender villains. Whatever the truth of Milady's historical origins, Dumas' fictional version has been a mainstay of the many Three Musketeers adaptations over the years. Musketeer films have been being consistently made by both Hollywood and numerous international studios since the early 1900s. Various productions have cast Milady as both slightly more sympathetic and more unforgivably monstrous, and throughout the long cinematic history of the character, she's been played by such notable actresses as Barbara Lamar, Lana Turner, Faye Dunaway, Rebecca De Mornay, and Emmanuelle Biert. Even as early as this year, a new French adaptation of The Three Musketeers was announced, which will see Eva Green portray Milady. A decade ago, successful writer-director Paul W.S. Anderson decided to make his own Three Musketeers film. Anderson's Three Musketeers would reinvent Milady as an acrobatic badass, aligned with a mustache-twirling Duke of Buckingham. And for both Anderson and his fans, there was only one clear choice for who should inhabit this new action movie interpretation of the classic character. Thankfully, the actress in question was not a hard get, as not only was she the star of his popular Resident Evil film series, but also his wife. Milla Jovovich continues, as the year is 2011, and Lionsgate Entertainment and Constantin Films are ready to launch a brand new cinematic franchise based on one of the world's most beloved stories, with the Three Musketeers. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Yes, the sound of another failed franchise launch means it's time for another episode of Failure to Franchise, the show dedicated to some of Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. This is Trev.
And I'm Chris. And you know what? I'm super excited to finally talk about The Three Musketeers, starring Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, and Justin Timberlake.
That's, you know what? I thought I was going to predict your joke this week. I thought you were going to say, and I'm Chris. And I'm really excited to talk about a period piece starring Mads Mikkelsen, Ray Stevenson, and Til Schweiger. But enough about King Arthur. Because, you know, you've done that formula before. So I thought maybe
I did.
Go back to the classics. But
I think the Til Schweiger thing didn't connect with me, but the other two did for sure.
For sure,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
That's because this week, I guess we should say this is our second edition of our summer event, Milla June-vovich. 2 weeks. What is going on? I'm off today, man. I'm sorry. I apologize already. It's a 2 months dedicated to our favorite leading lady, or at least mine. I don't know how you feel, Chris. Maybe she's up there. But Milla Jovovich, again, last time we looked at Ultraviolet, and in this episode we are looking at 2011's The Three Musketeers. You want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure. It is, I'm losing it too. This is going to be a mess.
But see how I just plow ahead. I don't,
Yeah, no, I know. I just take after take after take. This one is directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, written by Alex Litvak and Andrew Davies, and it's based on the novel by Alexandre Dumas. So it has a budget of $75 million. Domestically, it made $20.3 million, and worldwide, it made $132.2 million. So not quite there.
Right. Not a complete travesty.
No.
But not enough to justify what they were clearly setting up in the final minutes, and I'm sure we'll talk about that.
For sure.
So this is continuing our look at Milla Jovovich, and this is actually going to be, it's kind of exciting to get to do this one because we get to talk about, a creative and life partnership that is obviously very important to her and to her entire career that we didn't get to talk about last time. I'm going to try to make sure this entire episode to call her Milla Jovovich, because I know you put me on blast last time for screwing that up and accidentally saying Jovovich one time. And you know what I realized it was? I'm mad at myself because I've done a really good job over the past few decades of like teaching myself to always say Jovovich. And then what do? I pitch to you, and we move forward with an event called Milla June-vovich, bringing back that hard J.
Right.
I screwed myself all up. So anyways,
it's just a bunch of excuses, but yeah, keep going.
So anyways, Milla Jovovich. So let's definitely talk about. I guess do we need to talk about like the history of Three Musketeers? Whatever. Everyone knows the Three Musketeers, right? Mm-hmm. I guess actually, let me ask you first though, Chris. Was this your first Three Musketeers movie?
It was. I've always been aware of the Three Musketeers because, I mean, how could you not?
Because everyone is, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But, I've never sat through a feature-length movie with them at all. And there's, 20?
Yeah, Three Musketeers definitely have a long, storied history in Hollywood. So, in terms of the Three Musketeers and their place in cinema, like the very first Three Musketeers film was actually a French production made in 1903. And not too many people know about that, but then in 1911 we get a couple short films, silent shorts, and another French silent film in 1913. And from there it's just like off to the races. Then you have a 1916 Hollywood feature called The Three Musketeers, a 1921 Hollywood film called Three Musketeers. Well, most of them are called Three Musketeers. I'm not going to keep saying that. But that one had Douglas Fairbanks. You get into 1939 there's a comedic one with Don Amici and the Ritz Brothers. 1948, there's a Gene Kelly, Lana Turner, and Angela Lansbury Three Musketeers film. I think the ones that most people know, like the default ones people think of, are there's two different ones. There's the 1973 and 1974 films, The Three Musketeers and The Four Musketeers, which star Michael York, Charlton Heston, Oliver Reed, Faye Dunaway, and Richard Chamberlain. That was where those were directed by Richard Lester, who most people know is directing most of Superman 2, as we've seen it,
Right.
and Superman 3. And that was actually produced by the Salkinds, the same people who did the Superman films. And that was just a case where they made one Three Musketeers film, but it ended up being so long that they decided to split it into two, which was a thing that the Salkinds seemed to kept getting wrong. And then, of course, I think the other one that especially people like my generation remember is the 1993 Disney one, starring Charlie Sheen, Kiefer Sutherland, Chris O'Donnell, and Oliver Platt, and Tim Curry as Richelieu. So yeah, it's just this thing that just keeps coming back. Hollywood, and not just Hollywood, because there's plenty of foreign ones as well, or international, I should say. They just can't seem to go at least like 10 years without a new Three Musketeers film. But to what you were just saying about how like everyone just knows it, I feel like Three Musketeers, the Dumas book, it's like one of those books that everyone knows and like thinks they read maybe when they were younger, but probably really didn't, you know? And I realized like I don't even think I certainly know the story, but I'm racking my brain and I don't believe I ever read that book when I was younger. What I do know I read was one of those like abridged, rewritten for younger readers versions. You ever read those when you were a kid of like classic books?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's how I know the Three Musketeers, and then just from movies. So, but I was, it's kind of exciting that this is your first one. I definitely want to hear from you what that means to be introduced to the Three Musketeers
This way.
through this film. Yeah, for sure.
For sure.
But no, I think the most exciting thing to talk about in terms of this one and the Milla Jovovich of it all is her relationship with Paul W.S. Anderson, the director of this film, who of course was also the director of Resident Evil, the franchise that I think she is most associated with, other than perhaps Fifth Element. And they fell in love during the making of the first Resident Evil. I don't know if they were already married by the time the second one came along, but certainly at some point there they get married, start a family. Obviously, we know she remains the leading lady throughout the entire Resident Evil series, which he directs most of. 2 and 3 were the only two he did not direct. And of course, he puts her into the primary female role in this one, a villainous role this time, not necessarily the leading lady, but the main villainess, Milady de Winter. And in general, I think, and then they did Monster Hunter late last year, and I believe they already have like another project lined up now. So it's definitely a, Rob Zombie, Sherry Moon Zombie. What's another one? Give me another one of these.
Kate Beckinsale and
Len Wiseman.
Len
Right?
Wiseman.
Yeah, definitely one of those with a director coming pre-packaged with his own leading lady, and definitely a pretty successful one, wouldn't you say overall? But I guess that's just Resident Evil.
Well, yeah, I guess so. But I think it's successful on in different levels. It's successful on financially, not so much critically, but definitely just a great working and personal relationship that they both have.
Yeah.
In the years of being a fan of the Resident Evil movies, and honestly, Paul W.S. Anderson, which we'll get to right away here, they just work together, and it's nice to see that. It's rare in Hollywood when you see a duo of any kind really last this long, and through the pain and ups and downs of Hollywood. But they seem like they have a rock solid relationship. So Trev, too bad, you're probably never going to get your chance. but they really are. They're a really cool couple. That's kind of how I would say it. I like listening to them talk in interviews, separately or together. They have a mutual respect for each other. They're always like bringing each other up. In the interviews too, like they're never like, not that you would bring them down, but they almost go out of their way to talk about how special they are to each other, or even in the films that they make together. So I just really like them as a couple. That's how I would say.
Yeah, I do too, and I guess that speaks to like their likability as a couple. If even I'm behind it, because it stole my chance away. But no, I really like them together as well, and I think I do have slight mixed feelings about it though, not for any of those goofy reasons, but I will say, he obviously saw something in her with Resident Evil, and there's actually a really interesting story about how I don't know if you know this story, Chris, but she was already cast, and then she felt like she got like a script sent to her that was like a new draft of the film, and in the new draft, Michelle Rodriguez's character was really beefed up, and the Alice character was kind of taken down a little bit, was not as focused on, and that's because you have to remember at that point Michelle Rodriguez was the bigger star, right, coming off of Fast and the Furious. And we talked last time about how Mila's star had faded a little bit after Fifth Element. She hadn't immediately followed it up with any big hits. So she received a draft where suddenly Alice didn't seem to be the focus anymore. And she flew to like where they were going to, do the filming. And she said like the whole flight there, she was like really frustrated about this. When she landed, she immediately went to talk to Paul W. S. Anderson and was just like, I need to sit down and talk to you. What is going on here? Why am I suddenly like, why has my role been kind of taken down? And I've heard her tell this story about how the two of them sitting down and going over the script to kind of try and build her character back up. It sounds like that's maybe even where their relationship kind of really started. That's probably where they started to fall for each other.
Yeah.
So that's all happening during that period and then during the making of the film. But anyways, the point I wanted to make is he obviously saw something in her and saw that she fits really well into the kind of movies he likes to make. And you said that, you were mentioning how you're a fan of Paul W. S. Anderson. So am I. I think we'll both have our chance in this episode to kind of give our defenses of him in general.
Yeah.
But I think the one kind of drawback of that, I alluded to this in our last episode about how I do think Milla is a better actress than she sometimes gets credit for. And I think she's definitely been primarily now typecast into these kind of big sci-fi based B-movie action films, right? And I don't think the marriage and the relationship to Paul W. S. Anderson helps that any, Now, granted, it's probably not the worst problem to have because she's always able to just do another movie with him. But I do think people she got so locked into that world, and especially once they were married, and was of course just going to keep making Resident Evil movies with him, that I really think now she just can't break free from that. And I don't think Hollywood sees her in any other way.
Yeah, she's almost been typecast from her husband.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's weird because you'd think, I know she's not like, I was about to say she's
mind
not
you, like, well, I was about to say, like, not everybody wants a fucking Oscar. You know what I mean?
No.
Sorry, what do you want to say?
Well, I was even just about to say, no, and I was, that's not even what I'm talking about. I do think she's a better actress that could get more dramatic roles, and I think it's unfortunate that a lot of the dramas she's picked are ones that just end up being kind of, they don't take off for one reason or another, and that doesn't help. But I was even just going to say, like, we talked last time, too, about how the box office success of Resident Evil, and maybe some of these other ones like today's movie and Monster Hunter didn't work in the same way for whatever reason. But I'm kind of surprised that, like, she hasn't been cast in, say, the MCU or a DC movie yet. Like, I feel like she's big enough to get into those kind of bigger franchises, but I just feel like she gets a little bit ignored or cast aside because as successful as Paul W. S. Anderson's films, or at least some of them are, I think there's this like also this kind of negativity that kind of hovers around him and the kind of movies he makes. And they're just thought of as like B movies, even if they do make a lot of money, or as I said, some of them do. So I don't know. It's just, I feel like she could easily slip into one of these bigger franchises and something is keeping that from happening.
That's a really good point because Milla seems like primed to be part of these big franchises at this point. Like
she's like a geek icon anyways, right? So
yeah, like why isn't she popping up in The Mandalorian? You know what I mean? Like she'd be perfect for these types of roles. She doesn't have to be the star of her own show, but or the star of her own movie. But it definitely feels like for that geek iconography, as you're saying, why not give her a call? But you're right. There's this shroud of you know what? And I'm gonna get to it. It's a shroud of snark surrounding both of their careers, and it
snark
drives
and snobbery.
Me batty. Oh fuck yeah, snobbery. Perfectly said.
Which sounds like a great British sitcom. Snark and snobbery.
We gotta write that. Let's do that.
It's British. We only gotta write 6 episodes.
You're right, though. It's a shroud of it, and it's unfortunate because I don't think it's deserved. In the vitriol that it seems to be. First, can I just say, like, first and foremost, I'll just get this out of the way. After I went into this movie completely blind, and afterwards I just kind of like watched, little YouTube reviews here and there of like what people thought and checking, the critical response, and it really seems like people came into this movie wanting to hate it.
Yeah, and
it's that's a strange thing, and I'll get to that, but it really clouded. I think people's thoughts because it's funny because I watched things from critics or YouTubers, but then I watched audience thoughts. Like right after the movie, there's somebody with a camera and like a mic. It's like, what'd you think of the movie? And it seems like the audience like had a lot of fun. So it's just very interesting to see the people that are in the know and into the industry have a level of snark. But the general audiences don't seem to have that.
Yeah, Paul W.S. Anderson is an interesting case where I feel like there's been ebbs and flows to this in terms of the audience kind of reaction to him. The critical reaction to him has always been bad, for the most part. The kind of just professional critics, they're not really rushing to give this guy a lot of praise. But it's strange because you will see a lot of kind of the geek fandom community often kind of, shit on Paul W.S. Anderson a little bit. And like you said, kind of come to his films ready to make fun of them or criticize them. But at the same time, there's always been this thing where people are always like, but I do like that first Mortal Kombat movie. That was really good. And then be like, oh, you know what? Event Horizon, that's pretty good. And then I think of a movie like Death Race as another one where I feel like people are like, yeah, that wasn't so bad for what it was. It's just I think people like the movies more than they want to admit. Mm-hmm. Or they like them more than they realize that those are Paul W.S. Anderson films or something. And even in recently, and I think maybe you and I talked about this at the time. I know I talked about it with other friends, but in the build up to Monster Hunter, I feel like I suddenly saw more of a kind of, online at least, more of this sudden new acceptance of Resident Evil as a franchise. Like a franchise that people just crapped on all the time while it was running. Now suddenly people seem kind of nostalgic for it. And we're like, oh man, if Monster Hunter is as fun as those Resident Evil movies were. And it's like, well, where were all you when the movies were coming out and everybody was just saying they were terrible? Mm-hmm. But again, I guess that doesn't matter because the movies were making money. So
I think you nailed it by saying people don't want to admit when they like something schlocky. Mm-hmm. And I think me and you are on a very similar page when I'm very unapologetic about the things that I like. Yep. and I don't care that I rewatch movies ad nauseum. I don't care. I enjoy them. And if they're bad or whatnot, I'm looking at the list of Paul W.S. Anderson movies, and Mortal Kombat was the first DVD I ever bought. Mm-hmm. I remember going to buy that movie, and I remember the first time I saw it in my cousin's basement, and it was just and then the theme song and everything. It was such a blast, and it's better than the new one that came out, but doesn't matter. Resident Evil we rewatched last summer with our buddies on one of a Zoom movie night, and that movie fucking holds up. Mm-hmm. I own Death Race. I saw that in theaters. I own it on Blu-ray. It's awesome. Event Horizon I just recently watched for the first time, I think a year ago or more. Super great, super good. I fucking love Sam Neill, so that was great. Mm-hmm. It's basically a haunted house movie in space, so that's cool. I watched Alien vs. Predator at a different time in my life. I know that movie's bad. Okay, I know it's bad, but that one feels like it's bad because it's PG-13. I'll leave it at there. Yeah, there's a level of criticism towards his films that I just don't understand. I will say, though, why the hell was he hired for this movie? Do you know the history of that? I was really looking into it because I feel like I can get, how we do the background and history of the production and whatnot. What led Paul W.S. Anderson to do this movie? I understand the influences. It's got a very Pirates of the Caribbean vibe, and there's a lot of Pirates of the Caribbean that is in the midst of 2011. In 2011 when this came out, we were on our fourth Pirates movie at this point. Mm-hmm. So I understand trying to, ring that bell a little bit. But do you know what attracted him and Milla to this project?
I do. So I watched some interviews with him. And this isn't really a case of I don't know this for sure because he doesn't get into every single step of the process, but it sure sounds like this is not a project that was brought to him. This was a project he pursued because he is just a huge fan of the Three Musketeers. It was a book that he loved as a kid, and he talked about how when he was a child, him and his brothers and his friends when he was kids, they would get sticks and do sword fights and pretend to be the Musketeers.
So Three Musketeers, it's kind of a classic tale that keeps coming back again, retold. So what appealed to you about
it? I loved it. From when I was a kid, I read the book. I saw the Richard Lester movie. It's one of the first movies my father took me to see. I was a kid who chased other kids around the playground with a stick, pretending to be a musketeer, and then other kids chased me. I love it. I mean, I love the tale. I've always loved it. I've watched the many movie adaptations of it, and I think every generation gets its Three Musketeers because, while the movies date, the themes of the book never date. Love, honor, courage, friendship, these things never go out of style. And I felt, it was time to retell the classic tale, but do it with 21st century technology.
So it sounds like this was really like a dream project for him, like one of those movies that he was pursuing like his whole life, and he had to make. He had to get the success of the Resident Evil films to be able to make a Three Musketeers movie. Now, this raises other interesting questions, which we'll talk about when we get into our review of if that is the case. This is where it gets complicated, because when someone says, well, it's always been my dream to make a Three Musketeers film, I'm not sure why that dream turns into, but you know what I think it needs and never had? Giant steampunk airships. Like, that's where things get a little complicated. But yeah, this was a property that he wanted to do. And I think, everything you just said, you mentioned how Alien vs. Predator was only PG-13 and Mortal Kombat was PG-13. But, Resident Evil is obviously an R-rated series. Event Horizon is a really kind of brutal R-rated horror film. I think maybe he wanted to do a big adventure film that was a little bit more of a family movie. And he's talked about this as well, where he said he wanted to make a movie that fathers could take their sons to go see. Because again, he thought of this as, he loved the Three Musketeers since being a boy. So he thought this might be cool to make, a fun family kind of blockbuster as opposed to these Resident Evil movies I'm doing every couple of years.
Milla actually had similar thoughts. Obviously, they started a family. They've been making R-rated movies together for a long time. So she was on a similar page, I guess. Being a mother, and this is now in 2011. This is just a very different time in her career, and to see how far she's grown.
One of the things that I think is amazing is I read a quote from the producer of the film, and he said that Paul has branched out as a director since having a child, and it's something that he wants to do other types of movies, and it kind of gives him more of a creative range. As a mother, do you choose different roles differently now? Do you read scripts differently? Do you make different choices because you're a mother?
Yes, definitely. I think being a mom has completely changed my outlook on everything in life, and definitely in my career as well. It's made me more confident with who I am, but also it's made me definitely go, okay, when I was young, I did lots of different types of movies. I played lots of different types of characters. But, I want my daughter to be able to, watch the films that I make at some point and really stand behind me as an artist and like I'm standing behind her as a human being.
Yeah, and I think also for her and for him too, this is really an opportunity to, kind of make your mark in cinema history in another way, right? Like, it's one thing to do the Resident Evil movies. And, around this time she was also doing stuff like The Fourth Kind and, movies like 45, like these just action movies that will have an audience and people will like, perhaps. But when you make a Three Musketeers movie, you are, as we just said, there's so many of these. They've been making movies of these since, the early 1900s. You kind of are really throwing your hat into a realm of cinema history and of literary history. So for her, it's an opportunity to play one of the most famous literary villainesses of all time, right? And for him, it's an opportunity to say, hey, all those Three Musketeer movies, I made one of them. Like, I'm sure that's pretty cool. I could see the appeal of a filmmaker of doing something like Three Musketeers, even if maybe the inherent problem then is, what do you do to separate yours from the others? How do you make yours feel special? And maybe that's where he came in with his take on, well, we needed to make it, we got to use modern technology and do the airships and make it a little bit more steampunky and sci-fi, just to separate it. But yeah, I could see the appeal of saying, this puts me on a whole other level than Resident Evil. Of course, it didn't work out that way since it wasn't as successful, but I could see that as, potentially a part of what intrigued them about the property.
Honestly, I think that's a great way to leave it, and we should just start talking about the movie.
Okay.
Trailer drop. Bam, 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 Three Musketeers. All right.
There are things in this world worth fighting and dying for. We're warriors. It's who we are. It's what we do.
The Three Musketeers. I came to Paris to be one of you.
D'Artagnan, you want to be a musketeer? This is your chance. We live in a kingdom controlled by fear. The Cardinal rules the land. Buckingham rules the skies.
My new war machines will readdress the balance.
And she is the deadliest assassin the world has ever seen. Together, they will unleash war on the entire continent.
We're the Musketeers. It's up to us to put an end to the Cardinal's plot.
I could do with some exercise.
All for one.
And one for all!
Look out of the window.
Round 2.
There were 4 of us against 40 of them.
Was it 40? Or 400?
Just 40. It was an off day.
After failing in a scheme to steal Leonardo da Vinci's airship blueprints, the Musketeers are disbanded by Cardinal Richelieu, leaving Athos, Porthos, and Aramis on the streets of Paris to fend for themselves. In the meantime, the young and reckless D'Artagnan has set off from Gascony with dreams of becoming a musketeer himself, not realizing that the trio has broken up. The villainous Cardinal Richelieu is not only determined to be rid of the Musketeers, but also schemes with Athos's former lover Milady to undermine the reign of King Louis and his wife. The Three Musketeers, alongside D'Artagnan, must unite and defeat the beautiful double agent Milady and her villainous employer, the Duke of Buckingham, from seizing the French throne and engulfing Europe in war.
Well, I didn't envy you having to come up with a plot synopsis for this one. Because if there's one thing that's true of the original story and this movie, it is a complicated, more complicated than you would expect narrative.
Yes, and even more complicated to say. That has taken me probably 7 minutes to read out. I've just edited it beautifully for listeners. But yeah, this was both our first time watches, which is rare for the podcast so far. It happens a couple times, but Trev actually revisited the 90s Disney one. So I was thinking, you know what, let's let Trev take the reins here and go first.
Yeah, because this was a first time watch for me, but I think obviously in general I have a little bit more history with the Three Musketeers than you. So I've seen multiple Three Musketeers movies, and like I said, I read a version of the book when I was younger, and it's a story I feel like I know fairly well. And yeah, the night before I watched this, I did just want to give myself kind of a reference point. So I went back and rewatched the 90s one, which I remember really loving when I was a kid and seeing it in the theater. And now revisiting it, it doesn't hold up as well as I thought it would, but that's true of kind of most stuff from when you were like, 12 or 13. But it was still like a fun, it was definitely a fun 90s Disney action adventure movie. It was definitely that one you can look at and see like, oh, they're clearly trying to feed off of the success of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. It's very, very similar. Tim Curry is putting off big Alan Rickman vibes as Cardinal Richelieu. They cast American actors to play the Musketeers, and none of them even attempt a French accent. But yeah, it's a fun movie. So I it was kind of fun to revisit that and then sit down to watch this one, because I knew this one would have a different take. I knew this one would be more stylistic. I knew with Paul W. Anderson being at the helm, it'd probably feel much more modern. And of course, I knew from the trailers that it had this kind of like, as I said, this steampunk sci-fi element to it, which honestly is the biggest reason why I avoided this at the time it came out. It was that, and it was the whole 3D thing, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit. But we should mention this was Three Musketeers in 3D for its theatrical release. How they did not call it the 3D Musketeers, I will never know.
I know.
But yeah, so I was kind of like, I just didn't bother with it. And then, it just was something I never got around to. And so remember before we played the trailer and you did your synopsis, we spent, the early part of this podcast episode talking about how people should be really nice to Paul W. Anderson and stop harshing his buzz and stop being so negative. Well, this is maybe one of those exceptions, because I got to say, this one did not do very much for me. I do think this was really, I can't say it was disappointing, because I went in not thinking it was going to be very good, and that's kind of what it was to me. Now, that said, unlike Ultraviolet, this is a movie. I'll give it credit there. Like, this is a film. There are shots that are composed. There are scenes. There are characters, somewhat. There are some decent action sequences in this, and there are definitely some things I enjoyed. There's some fun to be had here. and probably more fun to be had than with Ultraviolet. But ultimately, yeah, this one, it's really tough. It's hard to explain what I don't like about it, other than I'll just say I think it's way too boring to be a successful action adventure kind of movie, which it's trying to do. And I think some of the changes they made to the basic book narrative and the overall story of the Three Musketeers are kind of baffling. And in terms of like the stuff with the airships and things like that. And I've got some other issues which will come up in the review. But yeah, I'm not going to spoil all my thoughts right now. But yeah, I can't say this one was like a big winner for me, unfortunately.
So I'm typically good at knowing when movies are released. And I have zero recollection that this movie even existed. And when we were doing, researching for the podcast and, gathering information on movies and whatnot and what we're going to cover, you had mentioned Three Musketeers. And I have, like, I truly, I don't remember trailers. I don't remember posters, nothing from 2011. And I was, like, always at the movie theater, like, which is crazy to think. So, like, not only do I have no history with the property itself, but even this movie, like, nothing at all. Mm-hmm. So I went in like blinder than blind. First I gotta say, I think I have a new favorite subgenre. It's called cleavage be poppin'. Mm-hmm. That's a good one. But overall, I liked this movie.
Really?
I quite enjoyed it. First and foremost, is it great? Not even close. But I had a really fun time. It felt like a live action cartoon. And I really felt the family film vibe of it all. And once that clicked for me, I could put that hat on. You know what I mean? And I could get into its mindset of what it was doing. But I had just a fun time. It was campy enough and dumb enough for me to have a good time with it. And like the historical stuff, like I don't really give a shit about. Like I really just don't care. But the production's design I thought was great. I thought all the colors are popping. Like it's just really, really nice to look at, other than some CGI, which we'll probably talk about. But I think overall the production value is quite good. It's got a swashbuckling feel that I was really into. It reminded me of Pirates of the Caribbean on a bunch of occasions. Not to the levels of Pirates of the Caribbean, obviously, but more like the mid-grade of what Pirates of the Caribbean could be.
Yeah, it reminded me of Pirates of the Caribbean 3 and 4.
Yeah, I would say lean more towards 4 because I just like 4 more than 3. Mm-hmm. But in general, I thought it was a nice... I expected something maybe like a gritty, brooding, dark interpretation, because that was what the time was, 2011. It was post-Dark Knight syndrome. Everything was dark and gritty. But this one felt like it was just had a little bit of life to it. That drew me in. So
yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know that you could do a dark and gritty Three Musketeers. I will give that to every version I've seen has been smart enough to keep that sense of humor and to keep the fun adventure aspect of it. And I think really... I'm kind of with you in being surprised that that's not what they've tried to push for with this one.
Yeah.
But I will say I'm kind of surprised to hear you say that you enjoyed it because of how campy it was, because that was kind of my issue with it, in that I just didn't think it was campy enough. So I didn't write too many notes during this one. This is like the least amount of notes I've ever taken during one of our films. But one of the notes I did write was one of the last things I wrote was, this is not what I always assumed it would be, but I kind of wish it was. And that is, as I just said, when it came out in 2011, I would see the trailers. I do remember this coming out. And the trailers with like the steampunk element and the airships, I just remember being like, what is this? And like that was kind of, at that time, that kind of pushed me away. And whatever it is, I think now when I sat down to watch it this week, I think I went in being like, this is going to be really stupid, but hopefully it's going to be so stupid that I have some fun with it. And that's where I don't think for me it ever crossed that line. I just felt more bored most of the time. And there are certainly some parts of it that are campy. So I don't know. We're probably going to bounce all over on this one because it's hard to go along narratively with this. But I will say, Chris, I'm about to say something that you very rarely ever hear me say about anything. Okay.
Okay.
One of the highlights of this film is Orlando Bloom. That's not something I typically say. But man, does he know what movie he's in. And he is like hamming it up. He's giving a super campy, very fun performance. And every time he was on screen, I was digging it.
Yep.
Christoph Waltz is being Christoph Waltz, and that's always great. But I guess I'll just say right now, I think one of the problems is the Musketeers, and in particular D'Artagnan, our focal point. None of them are interesting. I mean, maybe Ray Stevenson as Porthos, just because there's a natural, Porthos is always played as the comic relief, the larger than life one, and Ray Stevenson is having some fun with that. But I just felt like they were so non-characters to me, and in particular D'Artagnan. Look, nothing against Logan Lerman, but he's just not bringing it in this one for me, and that was actually a problem. That was actually a problem in the '90s one as well. Chris O'Donnell was like really boring as D'Artagnan. I didn't find them interesting at all.
Oh wow, yeah, like I'm surprised. I liked Logan Lerman. I thought he was good as D'Artagnan. I think the issue is his love interest more so than him. I think he's got nothing to fucking work with that actress. She's just not doing much. I thought he was charming. I thought he was charming, but yet also very out of place because he's like the only like American actor in the whole movie. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's very odd that it just leans, again, for me it hit me on that camp side. Then I was like, this is pretty dumb that they even cast this guy, and I kind of liked it. I don't know. I liked him playing off the other three. They don't play off a lot, which is actually one of my negatives on it. I think that the Musketeers get a little overshadowed by everything, especially the plot.
There's one poster for this film that's just like D'Artagnan gigantic in the forefront and the Three Musketeers very tiny behind him. And to be fair, like this is a book that for centuries now has been confusing people. Why is this called the Three Musketeers when there's four of them, right? And obviously that's the story is D'Artagnan hoping to join. But this one, I think, complicates that problem even more because the entire third act really focuses so heavily on D'Artagnan versus Rochefort, and the Three Musketeers kind of vanish from the action finale at the end, which I thought was a very bizarre decision.
Yeah, no, that's one of my negatives. Again, I don't think this movie's great. I don't think this movie's great, but for what it was, I enjoyed it. I know I mentioned Pirates already, the franchise, but I felt like there was like a Stardust vibe as well. You remember Stardust? Remember that film by Matthew Vaughn? Yeah. This is nowhere near as good as Stardust, I would say, but I felt like those things put your hands together, and then you get this Three Musketeers movie. Orlando Bloom, like you said, is awesome. I actually think he walks out looking like Liberace, was at a Siegfried and Roy demonstration. You know what I mean? Like he knows what he's doing. And there's just not enough of him, I would say.
You know what it is? Like he's diving. You can see this sometimes. He's diving into this with the gusto of someone who is clearly so happy to be getting cast in the kind of role he never thought he'd be offered. Because coming off of Pirates and Lord of the Rings, I think he was definitely typecast as dashing heroic man. And you can just tell in this, he's like, I really want to show what else I can do if you give me a villain role. And it's probably just an unfortunate byproduct of this film's failure that not enough people saw it for that to matter. But I really think this was I think he was just living this up, being like, oh, I don't have to just be the boring hero guy anymore. Because, there's really, we love Legolas, but that's just because of what he does in action scenes. There's not much there character-wise. And then, Will Turner is obviously consistently overshadowed by Jack Sparrow. And I feel like here Orlando Bloom is during my scenes, no one is going to overshadow me. I'm going to be what everyone is paying attention to.
Yeah, I'm going to be the Jack Sparrow this time.
Yep.
Yeah. Also, I have to come back to this. You weren't having stupid fun with it when Milla is running in slow-mo in a huge dress through a booby trap and sliding under, or when she's just basically Alice in a dress, having action scenes with the sword fighting and stuff. You didn't have any fun with that at all?
As I said there are things in this I like, and I'll let's talk about those now, because to be clear, and this is good because this is Milla Jovovich.
Yeah.
Pretty much every time Milla Jovovich is on screen in this, I'm all on board. She's great. She's a great Milady de Winter.
Some may say you're full mast.
Ship's mast as we have in this film. But yeah, no, she's awesome. As you said, there's some really fun like action scenes with her that really fit into that hyper stylized Resident Evil type action we've seen. You know, she looks great, like the corsets. I mean, obviously, that's where it gets maybe like kind of campy because you could never do the things she's doing. One of the scenes that did make me laugh out loud was the, they kind of replicate whenever like a bank heist has like lasers, and here it's threads, and she just does this like ridiculous CGI enhanced jump through the threads. It just looks so stupid that it made me laugh.
It's funny too. You have to say too. Paul W.S. Anderson just loves laser grids or some type of obstacle like that, hey? That's all I was thinking about. Resident Evil, AVP, Three Musketeers. Like, you're going to get cut up by laser beams or in this case, threads. It was hilarious.
But here's the thing, Chris, and I'm interested now to hear your thoughts on this. Because as you said, you don't think this movie's perfect, so I don't, like, even though you like the movie more than I did, but I'm interested to see if you agree with this. The downside to liking every scene with Milla Jovovich is that one of the big problems of this movie is it really makes a huge strategic mistake on a scripting level. And that is they remove her from the equation way too early in this movie. And she should be like the primary villain in the third act because she's the character that the movie is like kind of most interested in for much of the film. You know, Milady de Winter is the primary villain of the novel. She's like them going after her and dealing with her is pretty much what the entire second half of the book is all about. And in this movie, she ducks out of the film too early, and they make this really strange decision to have the final action set piece and the final like 20 minutes of the movie be focused on what's his name, Captain Rochefort. Now, normally I wouldn't be against this because it's played by Mads Mikkelsen, who's awesome. But he's been such a non-factor in most of the movie up to this point. And particularly when they make the big emotional finale of the film, or the action finale, come down to Rochefort versus D'Artagnan. That rivalry and that feud is not as interesting as the movie thinks it is. To that to be like the big final sword fight. The whole thing is like, you didn't apologize to my horse. And it's like, whatever, man, bring back Milady because she was the one that betrayed them in the very opening scene. She should be the villain at the end. And when she like leaves and it turns Rochefort into the main villain, even though he's had like, I don't know, 4 lines of dialogue up to this point, I just thought that was a huge mistake. And that's why I felt very checked out during the last like big action set piece. I was just not emotionally connected at all.
I agree with that for sure, and it also doesn't help that the green screen is atrocious. It's quite poor. It's one of those moments on green screen where like the wind is going the wrong direction, you know, and on an emotional level, it just doesn't work, and it is a mistake. I'm not really sure why they made that unless it's studio notes of being like, we need more boys in this boy movie. You know what I mean? Like it probably reeks of that, unfortunately.
It's really weird though, because they set her up as being like this kind of badass that's like their equal, and you never even get her like really having a fight scene with any of them, you know? Well, which it's just strange.
And she has such an emotional connection to them in general overall that when they're talking about their plan to attack and get back at the cardinal and set things in motion, she knows all their steps before they even take them.
We can't outshoot them, but we can outsmart them.
He'll naturally favor misdirection and deception. He knows we're expecting him, but that just ups the ante.
She knows us, what we look like, how we move, how we think.
He'll divide his forces, independent teams, each with their own point of entry to maximize their chances.
There are 4 of us, so we use...
Well, there's 5 of us, actually.
He's a skilled diver. He'll take the aquatic route through the Trader's Gate. Aramis will undoubtedly rely on agility and stealth. Check every tower, every rooftop. Porthos, on the other hand, will employ brute strength. One of his preferred methods is getting captured by the opposition. All the more reason to take none of them alive.
So why not have her as the main baddie the whole time? If there was one question I would have for Paul, would be like, yo, why? Why?
Yeah, and that's the problem. Like I said, I think the issue with that too is because, as I said, the very first scene in this movie is her working with the Musketeers. And that's interesting because you've never seen that in any other previous Musketeer adaptation. At least none of the ones I've seen. You know, the typical story of the Three Musketeers is when the story starts, her history with Athos is already in the past, and it's revealed to you throughout the story. So here, it's actually interesting that it started with the four of them working together and seeing her betrayal. And when you have her like leave the film earlier, then that's why Athos in particular, and even the other two Musketeers, they can't be as involved in the action at the end, right? Because they've lost their like primary villain is gone. So now it's just about D'Artagnan versus Rochefort. Just a very, very strange decision. Like, I don't even like, why not just have both of them around and keep intercutting between D'Artagnan fighting Rochefort to then cut to Milady taking on the other Musketeers, instead of just forgetting about the Three Musketeers in your movie called The Three Musketeers.
Well, because Logan Lerman was so hot right now at the time. You know what I mean? Like
was he ever?
You know how studios work.
Yeah.
In their eyes, he was gonna be the next big thing, which he definitely didn't turn out to be. I think he has some potential, but yeah, he wasn't gonna be the next Orlando Bloom. But even that didn't work out. So I don't know. Yeah. Can we go back to the Three Musketeers themselves? You're saying they're kind of a bunch of nothing burgers. That's kind of what I'm sensing here, which I agree to a point. I do like that I found them quite distinct. I don't know. I like that Porthos was that the big brazen brawler of the bunch, and he was funny. And then Aramis is like a religious ninja. That was kind of fun. Yet he also just the opening scene, he just bangs a chick randomly, like in a rowboat. And then Athos. Actually, I think Athos was kind of like Athos or Athos. What am I saying?
Athos.
Okay, so I was right.
Or Athos. I don't know. Okay. Whatever. It's one of those things I've always read. I don't know.
Yeah. Milla Jovovich. Okay. But Athos is the one that I think is the most boring. And I'll tell you the reasons why. That actor, what's his name?
Matthew McFadden.
Matthew McFadden. Okay. He's got a booming voice. Okay? It's boring, though. And at times in this film, I felt like he was making it deeper than it is. Do you ever meet those? You ever talk to a guy and they're talking to you and they seem like they're lowering their voice to seem more masculine and in charge? This guy felt like that many, many times. And I know he's got a booming, deep voice, but it really felt put on.
Well, all the Pride and Prejudice fans are going to be coming for your head now, Chris, for insulting Matthew McFadden, Mr. Darcy in Joe Wright's beloved Pride and Prejudice adaptation.
Don't you dare sick them on me. Unbelievable.
I mean, I'm kind of like, I don't know that I think he's putting on a deeper element of his voice. I think it's that the kind of dialogue he's given as Athos, it just lends itself to, right? He has to be like, I'm super stoic hero man, right? So when you have a voice like his already, it just comes across that way. Because Athos is very much played as, I am the hero of this film. I am the man who makes all the plans, right? And that's, in general, it's like everything you're saying about what you liked about the characters, that's the thing is like, that's just present in every Three Musketeers. Like what this movie's getting right is that the basic character traits. Porthos is always like the fun, kind of drunk, roughhouse musketeer. Aramis is always the religious ladies' man, which that's at the end of the first book he's actually going off to join a monastery, but he's still like definitely hooking up with women. And Athos is has the backstory with Milady, so that's like there's like a bit of an emotional story with him, but he's like the most haunted one, which I think they get across fairly well in this. But yeah, I just wish we spent more time with them to like further develop that. And I don't really have anything against any three of the actors here. And like I said, I do actually think Ray Stevenson is another highlight. But maybe it's just because I'm not into Logan Lerman, where they're putting a lot of pressure on Logan Lerman as D'Artagnan to kind of bring out their personalities, and I don't think it's working. I don't think they have much charisma with him. And it's strange too, because like, well, I guess this was your first time seeing anything with the Musketeers or knowing anything about it. But I was watching this, again, I watched the 90s one the night before. But I thought the movie did a really poor job, too, in the opening minutes of kind of making clear what the deal is with them as Musketeers. like when this movie started, did you even have an understanding like what the Musketeers are, or like why they were disbanded? Because like the '90s one at least starts with a scene of Cardinal Richelieu like actually disbanding the Musketeers, and you see the Musketeers are this gigantic force of many people, and they are the king's personal guards. And Richelieu disbands them to replace them with his own personal guards. And he has a scene where he says, the Musketeers are no more, and all the Musketeers like pull off their Musketeer outfits and throw them in a big fire and walk off. And then then later on you catch up with these three who are, kind of three of the most notable ones. And now they have nothing to do because they're not Musketeers. And I was like really confused in this one in the opening minutes about, are they still Musketeers? Like, what's the deal? Were they fired because of the mission going wrong at the beginning? That's kind of how they make it sound. But then were they the only Musketeers? This film seems like it's taking like a lot of like narrative jumps that only someone who would understand the story in the first place would kind of get. Did you ever feel lost by any of that or no?
Not to the extent, no. Like I just figured that they failed the mission, and then it was just like, you know what, you guys, you let this happen, so they're disbanded, like they're fired. You know what I mean? Like I just felt like it was a mission gone wrong. I was surprised by the time jump for sure. That was like what? Like that didn't make much sense. And because I'm not familiar with D'Artagnan, I was definitely like, wait, who's this guy? So
yeah.
I'm familiar, again, like I said before, with the Three Musketeers as an idea, but this young, hothead that wants to join the crew, I was not as familiar with, and I don't think it's handled that well at all because Logan Lerman, I guess D'Artagnan leaves his family to presumably join the Musketeers. I'm not really sure why he goes to Paris, but he goes to Paris.
That's where the Musketeers are.
No, I know, but it's just kind of like he runs through the streets of Paris, and then he knows exactly who to talk to. Like, are they supposed to be super famous, like around Europe?
No, I mean that's always so. One of the there are things in this that are definitely coming right from the book, and like it's always a thing in the Musketeers that he goes to Paris because he thinks he's going to become a Musketeer, and he gets there to find out they've been disbanded, and then by happenstance, he always just happens to like bump into these three and get into confrontations with them, and this is like a famous element of Musketeer lore where he challenges all three of them to duels like an hour apart, and then they all show up for the duel at the same time, and that's when they're attacked by the guards, and he helps the Musketeers, and from that point on the four of them are a group. Like that's always the story. This movie
that's
does
funny.
That right. Yeah,
because I liked when I thought it was hilarious that they all show up at the exact same time, like even though they were spaced apart. I thought that was funny, and then I did like the first big fight scene with all of them. I thought it was like super fun, especially because there's like this triumphant music that's being played, watching a crowd of people cheer them on, and they're just like slaughtering 40 guys, and I found that oddly hilarious. So I don't know if that was leaning into the camp or whatnot, but I don't know. Maybe I was on a different level while I was watching it, but I was just like, this is really stupid. but I was digging it, and I thought the action looked good too, and I like that showing like he's proving his stripes with the guys, but it definitely did feel convenient of him like running into all three and challenging them. Like I thought it was funny, obviously, but it was definitely so convenient. But I guess if that's part of the book, then I guess I can't
take it
say
up with
shit.
Alexander Dumas.
Yeah. I'll write him a letter. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, harshly worded letter. Yeah. Yeah, the action is fine anytime. As you said, the action's fine, and I'll just only use fine because I didn't think there was any action scenes that blew me away. But I would say it's fine whenever it's ground based. Like you said, like once you get into those airships, oh boy, it's not so good.
No, it's not.
And again, I don't understand, and I don't know if you knew this. Maybe you knew, but like that's like a complete invention of this film. The whole like airship thing, like that, there are not airships like in the story, in the book, or in any of the previous adaptations. That was the big addition to this version, was to say, hey, let's have this cool like flying airship battle, and I maybe that's I can't help but watch this and think that's the Pirates of the Caribbean influence, right? Saying, like, and I mean, they, like I said, they gave them these like ship masts. They have like the one that's like a giant like skeleton that they have Constance tied to, and the other one has like the gold lion kind of ship mast, and it's just like, okay, this is clearly Pirates of the Caribbean influenced. Oh, I wanted to go back a second because you mentioned the thing, not to nitpick every like dumb thing about the script, because even you admitted it's not like a perfect film or anything, but So the film starts with the four of them, the Three Musketeers and Milady, on this mission to steal these plans from Leonardo da Vinci for this airship. Apparently, they've been sent on this mission by the king, right? Because they are the king's guards. And the mission ends with them being betrayed by Milady, and the last thing they see as they pass out is her revealing that she's working with the Duke of Buckingham. They also, at this point, know, because they've seen the plans, they know the plans are for an airship. Then later, when the Duke of Buckingham shows up to Paris in a giant airship, King Louis is like, what is that? How does he have that? What? Isn't that the airship you sent the Musketeers to get plans for? And you also, at this point, should know that the Duke of Buckingham now has them, because wouldn't they have told you, hey, by the way, how our mission ended was the Duke of Buckingham got those plans? Like, that's just the kind of thing, like, this is a pretty sloppy script, you know?
It's sloppy, but I'm man, it's a live action cartoon made for kids. That's what I felt. It felt like a family film. And that's why I'm like really not as harsh on it as like you are right now, and being, you know, so nitpicky, because it really does feel just kind of like a Sunday matinee with the fam, and it feels designed that way, and that's why I can't be as bogged down on that stuff. I recognize that it's dumb, but also I'm just more like whatever about it. Like, I know that sounds like so passé for me to say, but I don't know. I have a hard time shitting on this one like I did with Ultraviolet. You know?
Oh yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. This is definitely a better movie than Ultraviolet.
Yeah.
And I said there are things to enjoy here. I think that's what makes this like frustrating for me, is that I like the idea of like a kind of more modern Three Musketeers film, and I even think there might have been like something cool to saying, okay, let's also add in kind of these like slightly more futuristic weapons here and there, and some, you know, CGI enhancements and stuff. But I don't know. I will even say, like, this movie at times is like more accurate to the original novel than, say, that 90s Disney one. The Disney film really like streamlines the story in a big way, but also in a sense to like actually kind of improve the narrative. That's the thing. It's the novel, the Dumas novel, has a very, very bizarre structure. It's like not a 3-act structure. It's very episodic. And like I said, the entire second half is all this kind of just different like wheeling and dealing and backstabbing and intrigue with Milady. So anytime someone makes a movie of it, you know, you see people kind of struggling with, well, how do we change this around a little? One of the big things that has happened in adaptations, this will give us an opportunity to talk about one of the other actors here, is that there's like a tendency now to always make Richelieu like the main villain. To say like, okay, Richelieu, he's got to be the one pulling all the strings big time. And that's kind of true of the book, but he's fairly minor in the book. You know, he is the one pulling the strings, but he's not really focused on that much. But like in the Disney one, right, that's Tim Curry, and he's clearly the main villain. And here they get Christoph Waltz, and they give him like a lot of scenes. Mm-hmm. But there are certain things in this one, like the thing with like the diamonds being stolen and trying to be replaced. That all comes from the book, so it's kind of fun to watch this and see how close this is to the book, and then be like, oh, but now here's a giant airship, like.
Right.
I would love to talk to someone who's like a scholar of the book and see what they think about this one, because there's always this kind of constant push and pull with, ooh, this is actually kind of close, and oops, no, now it's doing something very, very different. And I don't know, I find that interesting, even if I'm not necessarily entertained.
You know what? It's from what I'm gathering is it's kind of seems half baked on both sides. It's half baked as a modern retelling with CGI spectacle, but also half-baked as a truthful retelling of the basic structure of the book. So I think put those together and, you know, in a pot and swirl it around, it's not exactly clicking for you. I can see that. I can definitely see that. And especially coming in with, you know, with the baggage or the knowledge of everything else. I think that's what's helping me out the most here, listening to you talk about your criticisms, which are not unfounded either, by the way. Like, again, I'm not gonna die on a hill for this movie and be like, oh my god, you're a fucking idiot. You know, first of all, you already know that, so I don't have to tell you. But I kid. I come back with that.
Just go ahead. I'm gonna keep.
I lost.
That's fine.
No, I lost my train of thought. I lost my train of thought. Fuck. But coming from a complete detachment, I think I can just kind of do one of those turn your brain off moments. You know, like I wasn't I didn't care as much to see the airships. Like, did I think they were stupid? Absolutely. I actually wrote this down. I said, this is outrageous. And I go, this is the schlockiest stuff I've seen. But I sometimes dig schlock, you know? And in this context, maybe it didn't work as well as it was intended to, but I'm not watching this movie as a historical artifact. I'm watching it as a Sunday matinee silliness, you know. And maybe that's maybe right now Alexandre Dumas is rolling in his grave, like fuck this guy. But I mean, that's kind of where I fell on this.
Well, speaking of silliness, then, Chris, let me ask you. I want to see if there's I wonder if you were with me on this one. Did your soul die when James Corden walked into this scene?
Blanchet, what are you?
Complete and utter waste of space, sir.
And?
As much use as a fart in a bottle, sir.
Right.
In short, sir, a total tit, sir, but I can't work bleeding miracles.
Blanchet?
Oh. Thank you very much, sir. That's incredibly generous from such a handsome young man. Thank you very, very much. Will you be staying here tonight?
He'll be taking your bed, Blanchet.
Right, and so I'll be sleeping...
You may take the balcony.
Outside. The balcony outside in the cold. With birds shitting on my head all night. Great. Can I just say...
Wine, wine,
yes, of course. Wine it is, sirs.
Wine.
My note says, ugh, James Corden, he's the fucking worst. I hate James Corden.
My note says James Corden, no, with a bunch of O's. And then sure enough, so I think like you, I went into this not really knowing who all the supporting characters were. Mm-hmm. So when Mads Mikkelsen popped up, that was a nice surprise for me. I didn't know he was in this. I didn't expect to see Til Schweiger, who's also kind of very goofy in his brief time here. You know, he's hammier than I'm used to seeing. And then fucking James Corden comes in. And not only does James Corden show up, but he shows up as their manservant. And I don't know about you, but I did the instant calculation in my head of oh no, he's gonna be in the rest of the movie. He's not going anywhere. And sure enough, they take him with them on their adventures at the end. He's there during the entire action finale, and just as I expected, just a complete comic black hole every time they cut to him. But the movie clearly thinks he's funny, and that's just the worst, right? When a movie grinds to a halt for comedy bits, that it's oh, this guy's the best, right? And it's just oh no, and I didn't even crack the slightest smile during any of the scenes.
So I am gonna push back a little bit on there, but what I'm gonna say is I don't think the movie thinks he's funny. I think the running bit of all of them being super annoyed by him is the joke. And it's almost like they know that James Corden sucks, you know. And
you say that, but I will. You say that, but I will say again in one of the interviews I watched with Paul W.S. Anderson, he was talking about. He's well, of course, James Corden is the funniest, and one of the funniest things from the shoot is just how hard it was for everybody to keep a straight face when James Corden was doing his thing, and the actors playing the Musketeers, we couldn't do wide shots during those scenes because you would just see them all breaking up and cracking up at everything James was doing. And I'm really? Because it's all bad.
Well, I mean, he's in sales mode. I mean, he's not going to come out being so the running gag in this movie is how annoying my actor is.
Chris, I'm sorry, but if you're telling me the movie does not think James Corden is comic relief, you're insane. He is comic relief in this. The movie is not making fun of him in the way you think it is.
That's fair.
The movie is presenting him as a comic character.
Yeah. I don't understand the fascination with James Corden. And I mean, you know what? All the Cordenites are going to come for us now. But I have never understood how he... Honestly, I was about to say respectfully. No, disrespectfully. I don't understand why he's got his late night show. I don't understand how he's got a career. I just don't... I don't get it. That sounds mean, and I know we don't like shitting on actors, but you know what? That guy, like you said, he's a black hole of comedy. He's there's a lot of bumbling, bigger buffoons character actors out there, and a lot of them are very good. They know what they're doing and they understand it. But James Corden is just kind of he's bottom of the barrel for that stuff, right?
Yeah. You also just talk about a character you don't need. I haven't seen too many Three Musketeers adaptations that give them a comic relief manservant, and you know why? Because Porthos is the comic relief. you've already got a funny character. You don't need this other schlub along to make jokes. Like Ray Stevenson can handle that. And you've also got other funny characters. Like King Louis is very funny in this, I thought. I thought Freddie Fox was really, really funny as King Louis.
Oh yeah.
I thought doing his like little subtle kind of villainous thing that he does very well. I thought Christoph Waltz is pretty funny. So I don't know. I just didn't need. You never need James Corden, but I really didn't need him here.
Yeah, you're right. No need for comic relief. The characters are already doing this. We don't need a gag guy. Yeah. No. I hope James Corden never. Oh God, if he shows up in another movie that we have to do, oh my God.
It's gonna happen. It's bound to happen.
We're not gonna have to do Cats, are we?
I don't think so. I don't think anybody was crazy enough to think they're gonna do Cats 2. So I teased this a moment ago, and I just brought him up again. But Christoph Waltz, how'd you feel about him in this? So again, now to your point about how maybe like revisiting the '90s one the night before was a miscalculation on my part, because it does maybe create an unfair comparison. But then again, when you're making a new Three Musketeers movie, you can't help but compare it to others. But the night before, I watched the amazing, great Tim Curry just completely like hamming it up and just like going into this like super sleazy, cartoony, villainous performance that I believe everybody who saw that movie when they were a kid remembers as Cardinal Richelieu. And then we come to like a much more understated Richelieu, but it's Christoph Waltz doing Christoph Waltz, and that's always awesome. So I did like him quite a bit. I would imagine you did too.
Oh, for sure. I'm always a fan of seeing Christoph Waltz. It gets to a point when you're like, okay, like he's obviously like the villain. He's gonna be a villainous villain. You know what I mean? Like it's just he's just the bad guy.
Which is also interesting too, right? Because like we talk about people getting typecast, and it's strange. I get that he's like primarily typecast as a villain because of Inglourious Bastards, but isn't that strange? Because then like 2 years later, he also played like the most decent hero in Django Unchained, and also won an Oscar for that. And it's like no one ran with that. No one said like, oh, he's great as a hero too. Let's just keep casting him as bad guys.
He was a hero, but he's got like an edge to him. No, you wouldn't say like even in that movie?
Edge, but he on a moral level, he's so right. He's so righteous. He looks at slavery and sees it as just ugly and disgusting.
That's fair.
And that's eventually his downfall. He's such a good person. So I always thought that was really cool that Quentin Tarantino got him 2 Oscars, one for playing like the most disgusting, gross villain ever, and then a couple years later for playing like one of the most decent-hearted characters in any Tarantino movie. I think that's really cool. That shows his range.
Yeah, that is weird though. Yeah, because like 2009 Inglourious Bastards, villain. 2011 The Green Hornet, villain. The Three Musketeers, 2011, villain. I don't know about Carnage. I've never seen that. Or Water for Elephants. maybe he kills an elephant in there. Who knows?
He's just a regular guy in Carnage. Yeah. So
okay. Muppets Most Wanted, villain. Horrible Bosses 2, villain. Spectre, villain. Legend of Tarzan, villain.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he's a good
Big
guy in
Eyes,
Alita.
Villain.
Big Eyes. Is he a villain in there?
Well, he's an asshole who like steals his wife's like credit.
Oh, so definitely, yeah.
He does it well, yeah.
Yeah. But that's why, like, I guess in this one, I did like how he does his Christoph Waltz thing. I think that's what I like. So, is it a memorable performance? No. But I just think I like watching him on screen.
Yeah, he's got good chemistry with Milla. Their scenes together. His scenes with Louis, I think, are with Freddie Fox as King Louis, are really funny and entertaining. I think Milla's scenes with Orlando Bloom are good. There's a lot of good pairings in this, Again, it's just that weird thing where like I feel like I now as I talk more about it, I feel like it's like, man, I like every character except the main 4 that I'm supposed to care about, and that's a down. Well, I mean, not that there's not much to like Constance or Queen Anne, as you said, but yeah, everyone else is great.
Well, that's why I think my biggest negative to the movie is
James Corden sucks.
Oh yeah. if it wasn't clear enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my biggest issue with the film in general, is just I think that the Musketeers themselves are overshadowed. When it cuts to Milla and company, it's just a way better movie. There's a liveliness to it. And again, it's not that just because we're doing Milla Jovovich here, like everybody listening being like, oh yeah, we're just we're propping her up.
She's not, to me, she's not like when we did Ultraviolet, we said like this movie's garbage, but she's at least awesome. She's the best thing. I don't think she's the best thing in this movie. I think she's good, but I think Orlando Bloom is the best thing in this movie.
Absolutely. Yeah. He's chewing scenery on this one, which is nice. Speaking of Orlando Bloom and the Pirates connection, let's do some score horror. This feels ripped from Hans Zimmer's notes. Would you say?
Yeah, it's definitely. So this is by the music's by Paul Haslinger, who I'm not too familiar with, but there's definitely some moments in this. There's a moment during the airship battle that I was like, I almost paused it and rewound it to hear it again, but I was like, man, that sounds a lot like Hans Zimmer's score from Sherlock Holmes, which was a couple years before this, and I thought it was like really indicative of that. And I know you had a different connection, right?
Yeah, and it was more towards just the Pirates themes in general. Like, I just felt like that it just had that swashbuckling flair. And I'm surprised you don't really know much about Paul Haslinger. I like that guy. I've had a few scores on my phone for a long time. I liked his Death Race score. I thought that was cool. And he's got some interesting stuff sprinkled with the Resident Evil franchise. I can't remember if he does the 6th one or whatnot. I'd have to double check, but I recognize the name for sure. And I've heard his stuff
now.
before.
I mean, now I'm looking at his filmography, and I see that he did the score to Monster Hunter, which is a score I remember actually enjoying when I watched the movie a couple months ago. So, and yeah, as you said, now I see he does some of the Resident Evils and some of the Underworlds as well. So it seems like there's definitely a definite kind of film that you hire Paul Haslinger for.
For sure. And on that note, Trev, I'm sure I know the answer to this, but would you have watched another Three Musketeers movie coming from this creative team?
See, that's a tough call because in its final seconds, this one definitely goes hard on setting up a sequel. And its sequel setup involves the two characters we seem to like the most, the Duke of Buckingham, played by Orlando Bloom, and Milady with Milla Jovovich. They reveal that she is still a part of the equation. She is now realigned, or I guess being held prisoner, but whatever, by the Duke of Buckingham. And they're flying towards France in a gigantic fleet of airships to do battle with, so a big war between England and France now. So, like, part of me wants to say, like, yes, but another part of me watched this movie.
Right.
And so again, like because this all speaks to my final thoughts. I guess maybe if they could fix what my biggest problem with this movie was, and that's, as I said, my biggest problem is not just how dumb I think the airships thing is and how I feel like the third act kind of fails because of that, but it is really that, and you've even alluded to this, I think for a movie called The Three Musketeers, I don't think the Musketeers, all four of them, are at all the interesting part of this film. I didn't find any of them to be intriguing enough to carry the weight of this film. So if I would probably go see a second one if it had happened. Well, I didn't even see this one, so I can't say that. But if it existed now, I'd probably give one more a shot to see if they could fix that problem, to see if maybe they could like beef up the Musketeers and make them a little bit more interesting. But otherwise, I'd be pretty apprehensive going into it. It sounds like you'd be all about it, though.
Yeah, I'd be down. First, though, do you think that, let's say you get the same creative team back, do you think they rework the sequel to be more about Milady and maybe position her as the main character, especially if you got Paul W.S. Anderson? This movie makes money in our thought exercise here. Do you think the studio's like, we got gold here, makes sense, Resident Evil's $1 billion franchise, let's start to reshuffle the protagonists?
Well, it's interesting because this is actually a rare case, and this kind of speaks to your point about it being kind of like a Saturday morning cartoon, or kind of definitely a family film, which it should be. That is what Three Musketeers should be. But at the end of this movie, basically all of our main characters are still in play. The only character who dies, spoiler alert, is Captain Rochefort, the leader of Richelieu's guards, played by Mads Mikkelsen. And again, we didn't talk about this enough. I mentioned it, but this is another negative of the movie. It really doesn't matter that he dies because he does nothing in the whole film. Like he's barely a factor, and that sucks because it's Mads Mikkelsen. And when he showed up, I was like, oh, this is great. And then he doesn't do anything, and then he dies. But everyone else is still there, right? Orlando Bloom is still there, Richelieu's still there, Milady's still there. So maybe they would like start focusing it more on her. But I don't know. I could also just see them trying to play it exactly the way they're doing. I do think what I will say is interesting is that there are sequel novels to the Three Musketeers. There's a sequel. There's a novel called 20 Years Later, which just as it sounds, picks up the story 20 years later. And then there's another book that Dumas wrote that people would probably be familiar with because it has been adapted itself as a couple times as The Man in the Iron Mask. So there's that DiCaprio film, which is about the older Musketeers getting involved in that famous story. But this one is obviously setting up its own thing with this Duke of Buckingham story. That's interesting too, because like the Duke of Buckingham, who is kind of a primary villain in this as well, is not even a villainous character in the book. Him and Queen Anne are really having an affair in the book, but that is because King Louis kind of sucks, and Queen Anne and the Duke of Buckingham's love affair is kind of more justified a little bit in the original story. But anyways, whatever. I'm getting into like literary talk now. But so I'm just making the point that they were clearly setting up their own like Musketeers story moving forward. So that gives them freedom to do whatever they want. So my hope would be they would beef up Milady. Do you think? Let me reverse that question. Do you think there's any possibility that they would do a thing where Milady starts to turn good in the sequels?
I think knowing the way Hollywood works and how villains can never stay bad and death is meaningless in a lot of these big budget franchises, I think it's almost a given that she goes back and joins the crew. And maybe she joins it in the second movie, and then the third movie becomes, the Five Musketeers. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it just feels like something like that would happen, that she definitely joins the gang, she's part of the crew, and now we have our first female Musketeer. That's how
that's literally what you could do, right? You could have the next one be called Four Musketeers and the third one be called Five Musketeers.
Totally. Yeah.
Just to make it really confusing. What? The second movie is called the fourth, and the third movie is called the fifth? What? Before you say anything else, Chris, sorry, I know you have a point you want to make, but there's one last thing I want to say, and that is I just want to say the name Luke Evans, because I'm pretty sure we haven't even said his name yet.
Oh my God, you're right.
We've talked about Matthew McFadden, we've talked about Ray Stevenson, but we haven't even mentioned that Luke Evans plays Aramis. Luke Evans definitely strikes me as like another one of those guys that Hollywood has like been trying to make happen for like a long time, don't you think? And it's just like not ever really taken off.
He's kind of, I'm saying this respectfully because I like Luke Evans. I like when he shows up in things. I like his screen presence, but he's like discount Orlando Bloom, right?
I don't know that I see him that way. I feel like to me, he's just more like, he's another like Josh Lucas, right? Or he's just like another one of those like generic, handsome leading men who you look at him and you get why he's a Charlie Hunnam kind of, right? You get why Hollywood looks at him and wants to give it a shot, and then give it a second shot, and then give it a third shot, and then you start to be like, all right, guys, we can cool down on this a little bit, right? It's hard for me to see him as like, to me, I'm sure I'm in the minority here. I primarily associate him with that like lame Dracula movie he made, which we're gonna have to cover at some point. Right. But yeah, I know he's been in the Fast and Furious, and he's been in the Hobbit film, so he's definitely been given a lot of shots. But yeah, I just feel like he never takes off. But I certainly didn't mind him in this. As I said, like, I feel like the Musketeers are all underwritten in this, but I don't think any of them are giving bad performances. So I'm not shitting on him here. I wanted to make sure we mentioned him because we mentioned the others.
I really have one more thing to talk about here regarding the movie. And before, Trev, you said it's definitely a family film, and it you said something like, that's what it should be for. It should be for families, right?
Yep.
Well, I went back and I looked at the marketing afterwards, and the trailers are definitely not leaning into the family fun nature as I think the movie actually did. Mm-hmm. And do you know about Milla Jovovich versus Summit Entertainment?
I'm not aware of this, no.
Okay. So, back in 2011, Milla was on a plane flying to, I think, the Japanese premiere or presser for the film. And obviously talking with her husband about the film's marketing, was quite mad about it. And she tweeted, "Do you think people know about the movie? Ask your friends. Do they know it's a fun family film? Are Summit promoting it as a family adventure movie? Or are they resting on their laurels from Twilight and making no effort? Let me know." And then she tweeted again, "I think Summit have swept Three Musketeers, a great family adventure film, under the rug in the US. Shame on them. Shame on you, Summit," in all caps. So
that's funny because now, as you said that all came back to me. Now I do remember that.
Okay. Yeah. So she said this, and I guess a reporter did reach out to Summit right out, because obviously they had to do some damage control, right? Because the movie was coming out, and she was kind of bashing it. Not the movie, but just the studio behind it. And Summit, an executive pointed out that the actress had been up in Canada shooting the next Resident Evil installment and working 15-hour days and probably didn't see the campaign. She doesn't know what she's talking about, and we don't know where she's coming from. Wouldn't you think she would call us first about this? It's frustrating. It's not the right way to behave. If she has a problem, then come to the studio and talk about it. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Has Milla ever made a movie with Summit again, or even Paul?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'd have to look into it, because it just feels like that. It was interesting to hear an executive say that publicly, and it kind of this back and forth social media. I don't want to say fight, but definitely words. I found it was. I like Milla quite a bit, and I like how honest she is. I've watched a lot of interviews over the last couple weeks, especially preparing for our 2-month event, and she's just very passionate. And she sticks to her guns, and it's kind of interesting that she said this. Is it a little out of turn around opening weekend? Yeah.
Yeah, it's, this is one of those interesting how the sausage is made kind of moments, because it definitely sounds like at some point her and Paul clearly got word of like what the tracking was, right? And they knew this was not going well. And that's probably where that frustration came from. I mean, to her credit, I will say, I think she's half right. Because now having seen it, as I said, I don't think this movie was marketed in a way that really made clear what the film is. I think the marketing to me definitely made it look like more of like a sci-fi steampunk Three Musketeers than it is. Like that stuff's definitely in there. And like I said, I think some of it's interesting, but most of it's pretty corny and stupid. But that is not at all like the focus of the film. Like, there's the airship stuff in the third act, and there's some stuff with like different weaponry and stuff throughout the film. But this is ultimately 70% a Three Musketeers movie, in that same kind of family film adventure style. And I think the marketing was trying to capitalize on her and Paul W. Sanderson connections to Resident Evil more. So I'm kind of with her, but I would say I think the bigger problem with this film that no marketing was going to help was that at the end of the day, your 4 major leads, none of them were stars.
Right.
People might, as I said, people might like Matthew McFadden for some of his work. People might like Luke Evans. Logan Lerman, I know, had Percy Jackson the year before. That wasn't even that giant of a hit, even though it did well enough to eke out one sequel. And who's the other one? Oh, Ray Stevenson, definitely not a star, right? So I mean, you're really asking a lot of an audience at the time to get excited for this movie when there was nobody. Maybe they should have focused on her more in the marketing to try and draw in some of that Resident Evil crowd, because I don't think the 4 leads were doing it.
No, I agree there. I agree.
Yeah.
And that really sums up our thoughts on the Three Musketeers. Trev thought it was meh, and I had a pretty fun time with it.
More like the Three Musketeers, right? Hello?
So Trev has to. We talked about it in our first installment of Milla Jovovich that we wanted to, specifically Trev wanted to focus on maybe an understated career path or interesting tidbits about Milla, and it's called the Milla Minute.
You fucking know what you want, and you're going after it. That takes a big set of iron balls.
My name is Alice.
Milady, boss.
I mean,
it's like...
Yeah, so for this edition of the Milla Minute, I wanted to highlight what I believe is an underappreciated Milla performance, and what I also believe is just an overall underrated, underappreciated film. So I want to take our listeners back to 2002 for a comedy drama film called Dummy. Chris, have you heard of Dummy?
Nope.
That does not surprise me, because not enough people have. But I honestly believe this is one of Milla's best performances, and overall a very, very fun film that I think should be at least a bigger cult hit than it is, if not just a bigger kind of more known film in general. So Dummy is a really nice little simple but bizarre like romantic comedy starring Adrian Brody, Milla Jovovich, Vera Farmiga, Jared Harris, Ileana Douglas, and Jessica Walter. Pretty great cast, right?
Oh wow, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. And so what this is Adrian Brody plays this guy who he's this young adult or adult man still living with his parents, not really knowing what to do in life, very socially awkward, has a hard time kind of connecting to people. And one day he discovers that he kind of has this like knack for ventriloquism. So he gets a ventriloquist dummy and it kind of starts to take over his life. And he's like, this is what I want to do. And his whole family is like really worried about him because they feel like he has no direction. And they're not sure this is the thing for him. And meanwhile, he's kind of been working with a social worker played by Vera Farmiga, and he starts to have feelings for her. And so that's like the romantic angle of the film is this like cute little love story between a very socially awkward Adrian Brody and Vera Farmiga, who's trying to kind of break through to him. And then Milla Jovovich plays Adrian Brody's best friend. Her name is Fanny, and she's this punk rock singer. She's in a local punk band. And she's kind of the only person who really sees something in him and, is not bothered by how kind of quiet he is and how awkward he is. She likes him a lot, and not romantically. That's just a complete platonic friendship. But her performance in this is just so much fun. She's got just this great like comedic energy. She's like kind of like constant. She's always smoking pot. She's like very spazzy. She's always super high energy. Constantly moving around. Just a really, really good performance. And what they do with her character, I don't know if you know what klezmer music is, Chris. Have you ever heard of klezmer music?
I have not, no.
It's kind of like this like famous traditional Jewish kind of music. And so her band is like really, they're a little punk band in this small little Midwest American town. And they want to take any gig they can get. And so they agree to this gig for a klezmer band, but they don't actually know what klezmer is. And so she just says like, yeah, of course we know klezmer. And then they have like 2 weeks to learn klezmer music. And like that becomes like this like running subplot where she just is then like throwing herself into trying to learn this entirely new kind of music, even though she's a punk rock singer. But yeah, very, very fun little film. Like I said, it's interesting to see Jared Harris in a very small role before he started to really blow up. And of course, as we all know, Jared Harris and Milla would later work together again in Resident Evil 2. We all remember that, right? Anyways, but definitely track this one down. I just think it's a movie that really flew under the radar, unfortunately, which is surprising just given the cast. But I really do think it's one of her best performances, and it's actually one of my favorite Adrian Brody performances and one of my favorite Adrian Brody films. Speaking of another actor who I thought should have a better career than he does.
Yeah,
some definite career mismanagement on his own part there a little bit. But yeah, we recently lost, unfortunately, the great Jessica Walter. So, you get to spend a little bit more time with her here. I think Ileana Douglas is another actress who I just always love, and she's great in this as Adrian Brody's like kind of overbearing sister. Just all around great performances. This is definitely an early film where I started to fall in love with Vera Farmiga as well, which is still continues to this day. So yeah, check it out. It's a good one.
And it's a cool 91 minutes. That's
very, very short. It flies by. Yeah. And and like I said, I would consider it like a little bit of a romantic comedy. And, I think, Chris, like that's not normally a genre that like I'm attracted to. So it speaks to like something when I'm like, oh no, this is good. This is good stuff. I think this is the kind of perfect, this might be a good date movie because I think it's funny enough and weird enough for people who don't normally like those kind of movies. But then the people who do like romantic comedies will still, dig like the romantic relationship that's forming here.
Cool. Well, just like last episode where I was going to look into Milla's musical career, I think I will put this on the queue and track it down and take a look. No, that sounds actually really good. I was worried it was going to be like 2.5 hours. I'm like, hey, that's not going to happen. No. So that brings us to the end of the episode.
More like the Three Musketeers. Remember when I said that?
If you'd like more comedy bits like that, please follow us on Twitter at F2FPod. That's at F2, the number 2FPod. We're on Insta, Facebook, everything. Check your podcast app. The links are there. Rate, review, whatever you do. Like us there. Like us everywhere. And honestly, the best thing to do is just join the tribe and hit that subscribe. And keep up with us because next month is our third installment of Milla Jovovich. Trev, what are we doing?
We're going to be looking at the reboot of Hellboy.
Yes, 2018, right? Or 2019.
Another villainous Milla role.
Oh, right. And this is my second watch of that film. Trev, this is going to be your first.
Yep, never bothered. For reasons we will discuss.
Yeah, I guess so. But yeah, I guess that's really it. I hope you guys tune in for that, and I guess
Milady de Winter, more like Milady de Winter.
Thanks for listening.
See ya.
Stupid. We're idiots. You know that, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay, good.
All for one, and one for all.
You know, sirs, I know you can be mean, tough, foul-tempered bastards, but sometimes I get the feeling that deep down you're all...
Shut up, Clancy.
Yeah, of course.